Hey guys! So last year I read a little over 100 books and I thought it could be fun for us to take a little bit of time and discuss the good, the bad, and the awesome. I tried to keep my thoughts concise and spoiler free so as to not ruin the reading experience for you in case something you might be interested in ended up on my list. Alright, so let's start this video with the worst novels that I have read in 2023. Surprisingly enough, there are very few of them, so let's begin with the best among the worst and make our way to the ones that were an absolute waste of my time. Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng, a contemporary fiction novel as well as the winner for the best fiction in 2017, was absolutely not my cup of tea. In 2020, Little Fires Everywhere was adapted to a TV miniseries which might be an absolute masterpiece, but since I have not watched it, the thoughts and the feelings I share here are exclusively about the novel. Little Fires Everywhere is a story of a seemingly perfect family, the Richardsons, living in a perfect town whose idyllic life is suddenly interrupted by the arrival of Mia, an enigmatic artist, a troublemaker, and her daughter Pearl. Richardson's lives are intertwined with those of Mia and Pearl, and no one is truly ready for what this collision of two very different forces is about to bring. So yeah, I didn't like it. I can't say that I hated it. It's well written, it has interesting ideas, multidimensional characters, and a couple of great plot twists. But at the same time, reading it felt like work. The pacing was very slow, the storyline at times confusing, the themes explored were very complex, and yet somehow it felt like the author is trying to push them to be perceived as simply black or white, and it left me with absolutely no characters to root for. Absolutely all of them sucked. The book tries to give us the conclusion in which it is implied that the good guys won, but I would argue that there were no good guys here. Just a bunch of strong-headed people who believe that they knew best. I've read it, I don't recommend it, but if you read the synopsis for yourself and you are intrigued, then sure, give it a try. There is much worse you could be wasting your time on. Listen to Me by Tess Garrison, published in 2022, is a crime novel as well as a 13th book in Rizzoli and Isles crime series. Now, it pains me to have to put anything written by Tess Garrison in this list. I love Tess. She has been my favorite crime author for as long as I can remember. I have read most of her books, and her crime novels such as The Surgeon, Body Double, Harvest, Gravity, Playing with Fire, Mephisto Club, or I Know a Secret are absolute masterpieces. The way Tess has managed to use her medical degree in order to make her crime novels feel realistic has always fascinated me. But Listen to Me just felt flat. Instead of a unique and fascinating crime followed by an intricate process which leads to uncovering of the truth, this time around we got a character drama with lots of POVs and no coherent story. Instead of getting a full meal at a 5-star restaurant, we got a buffet. Lots of short stories about remotely connected people to read about, yet nothing that would hold any actual weight. Nothing that would leave me truly satisfied. The Dare and The Losers by Harley LaRox, a prequel and the first novel in the Loser series, published in 2019 and 2022 respectively. Now these books fall under the dark romance, BDSM, and reverse harem umbrella. It's pretty dark and pretty intense, so I would definitely not recommend it to anyone younger than 18. And to anyone who is not used to reading dark romance, I would advise to check out the trigger warnings instead of jumping in head first. This series is about a young girl named Jessica. Back in school, she was the popular girl, the queen bee, someone desired and envied, as well as someone cruel, someone who didn't see any issues in hurting others if that would make her own life easier. These series are also about 4 guys: Manson, Jason, Lucas, and Vincent. Guys who more often than not ended up being the targets of Jessica's and her friends' bullying. But high school has ended, and its rules do not apply to real life. In real life, these guys are dangerous and they want revenge. And Jessica, well, she simply wants them. So yeah, these books were not for me. I like dark romance. I like well-written BDSM, as well as I do like well-written reverse harem, and yet I can't say that these books made me feel anything. Objectively speaking, these two books are not badly written. Some scenes are wildly entertaining, and some interactions between the characters really hooked me in, but at the end of the day, I was not burning with desire to know what will happen next. In addition to that, when reading BDSM, I feel like the adequate show of aftercare is crucial. Yet in The Losers, for most of it, it felt like the guys treated Jessica atrociously, and inside and outside of the bedroom. That being said, if you want to read a book with an insane amount of sex scenes, or if you are looking for a way to explore your own sexual desires, which might be leaning towards this darker side, then these series offer so much variety that even if you won't find the storyline enjoyable, you might still actually learn something new about yourself. Lila by Colleen Hoover, a paranormal romance novel published in 2020, was something that took me completely by surprise. But before we start talking about Lila, let me quickly say that I am aware of this never-ending discussion on whether Colleen's books are harmful or not, and as a person who loved some of her books and did not care for the others, I believe that it's all in the eyes of the beholder. As with any other piece of literature, you have to take responsibility for choosing to read a book that deals with the topics that make you feel uncomfortable or are inappropriate for your age category. That being said, let's go back to Lila. Lila is a story of Lila, obviously, and Lead. Two young people who meet at a wedding, instantly fall in love, and live happily ever after. Until one day, during a break-in, Lila gets attacked, and while she does recover physically, mentally she's just not the same. In order to help her and their relationship, Lee decides to take her to a place they first met. Instead of getting better, however, her behavior takes a drastic turn for the weirder. And it's not only her behavior that changes. Strange things start to happen all around them. Soon enough, a third person comes into picture. Willow. Lead and Willow quickly notice that they share a connection. But the closer Lead gets to Willow, the further away he gets from Lila, even going as far as risking Lila's well-being in favor of helping Willow. So I have to say that I have read most of Colleen Hoover's books, and this has to be the creepiest one of them all. And I'm not even talking about the supernatural, magical realism aspect of the story. I'm talking solidly about the relationships of the main characters. Now, if you have read this book, you know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't, then know that I prefer to stay very vague in order not to spoil any of the details that makes this book somewhat interesting. Just keep in mind that if you will decide to give Lila a try, you will be reading a story with an underwhelming amount of physical and psychological abuse in it. So maybe don't treat this as a romance. Treat it as a really messed up thriller instead. The Dark Side series by Christy Cunning, published in the years of 2017 and 2018, is paranormal romance reverse harem fantasy series that consists of 4 books. 4 Psychos, 3 Trials, 2 Kingdoms, and 1 Apocalypse. I stumbled upon the series completely by accident, and truth be told, I found the first book to be kind of interesting. Now, I'm not going to spoil the whole series, but to explain it in a simple manner, the premise of the first novel is that we follow a young woman who is also a ghost haunting a house of 4 men. Said ghost doesn't know who she is, how she died, or when. She has no recollection of her previous life. But as the time goes by, she realizes that she feels stronger when she spends time around the 4 men, and consequently proceeds to spend more and more time with them until eventually the men gain the ability to see her too. So yeah, the idea of it got me quite intrigued. Now, I knew right away that the series will not be a literally masterpiece, but it seemed like an original idea and very easy read for a day when you just need to shut your brain off. Not gonna lie, I grabbed 4 Psychos for the smut and the paranormal angle, but more than anything else in the books, I ended up appreciating the emotional turmoil of our main character realizing that just because she spends all this time around the 4 men, it doesn't mean that she is not a stranger to them. I appreciated how initially mistrustful and one-sided this relationship was. And while the first book had a storyline that hooked me in, and the second gave me some answers, the third and the fourth got completely off the rails and lost me. The author seemed to follow bigger is better mentality and kept on trying to build deeper and deeper lore concerning the main characters, making them feel more and more cartoonish, as well as expanding their world to the extent where, at least to me, the series lost the little charm they had in the first place. The Cog Down the Block by Amy Award is a contemporary romance novel that was published in 2023, and it's a first book in the Cocky Kingman series. This novel tells us a story of Chris, a famous American football player, and Trixie, a curvy librarian. These two have known each other for most of their lives and have been best friends for just as long. Chris, however, doesn't see Trixie as just a friend. And finally, his opportunity to tell her how he feels arises when Trixie asks Chris to pretend to be her boyfriend for her school reunion. Now, there wasn't anything inherently bad with the novel, it's just that the storyline was boring, the writing extremely simplistic, the dialogue's cringy, the pacing weird, and last but not least, the problems our characters experience were handled in a very superficial manner. Overall, to me, this felt like a first draft of a novel that had some good ideas but needed to go through few critical evaluations and consequently be improved and maybe even rewritten. Marley and Me, Life and Love with the World's Worst Dog is a memoir by John Grogan that was first published in 2005. Now, I have seen a movie adaptation of this book several times, and every single time it has left me in tears. So when this book was suggested for our book club, I was pretty excited to give it a try. So, story time. About 4 years ago, my boyfriend and I adopted a 3-year-old Jack Russell Terrier, Viggo. We knew that most likely he had been raised in a somewhat abusive household, and quickly enough we started to notice the signs of it in Viggo's behavior. He was constantly anxious, constantly stressed. He would attack every time he heard a louder noise or someone made a sudden movement. We spent years trying to adapt our behavior in order to ease his anxieties. We started walking slower when he was around. We never ran inside the house. We kept our phones on silent. We made sure he was aware of our intentions to stand up from a couch and so on. In addition to that, we got a personal trainer involved who worked together with Viggo and us on finding ways of how to make everyone's lives easier. When years kept on going by and nothing truly helped, we got veterinarians involved. We tried hormone chips, calming colors, and a variety of supplements and prescription medicines. And sometimes Viggo has good days and sometimes he doesn't. And that's what we learned to accept. Viggo will never be like the majority of other dogs. But he's ours. He's our joy and our responsibility, and reading about a grown-up man mistreating and or neglecting his dog for years, and then writing a book about how Marley has been the absolute worst because he had a lot of energy, separation anxiety, pooped a lot, and was afraid of thunder pissed me off. Now, I'm not going to go as far as to say that Joe Grogan and his family mistreated Marley, since it was a different time and consequently different types of training techniques were encouraged by professionals in the field. But trust me when I tell you this book did not age well. It's not worth your money, and it's most definitely not worth your time. If anything, it's time we let this book get lost in the oblivion. Dead Until Dark by Charlaine Harris, and the first out of 13 books in Sookie Stackhouse series, is a fantasy/paranormal romance that was first published in 2001, and it's the inspiration behind the very well-known Golden Globe and Emmy-nominated TV show called True Blood. True Blood came out when I was a teenager, obsessed with Vampire Diaries and Twilight. Yet even while being a silly, cheesy vampire show, it also carried much more mature themes and was considered to be pretty racy TV. Even as an adult now, I tend to turn on True Blood on occasion, as well as I would argue with anyone about Bad Things by Jace Everett being one of the best intro songs to a TV show of all time. Right up there with the intro songs for Supernatural, Friends, and Game of Thrones. Right, I think I'm losing my point here. What I was trying to say is that True Blood was a big part of my teenage years, and that's why I knew for years that I will be collecting all 13 books in the series. And so I did, which wasn't an easy task since I wanted to own them in my mother tongue, aka Lithuanian language. But with the help of my sister, I managed to collect the full series and settled in to read Dead Until Dark, just to realize that this is one of the very few occasions where the show is so much better than the book. The quality of writing is rather poor, the characters are hardly fleshed out, the main heroine is pretty stupid, the romance subplot is rushed and confusing, and the book overall just felt really boring. That being said, I will proceed to read the rest of the novels in the series because I already own them, but if you haven't read Dead Until Dark yet, then I would strongly suggest you to just go watch True Blood instead. Haunting Adeline by H.D. Carlton is the first book in Cat and Mouse duology and a dark romance which was published in 2021. It's also the worst book I have read in 2023 and the last book in this list. So Haunting Adeline is a story about a young woman who inherits her grandmother's gothic house and therefore moves to live by herself into this rather secluded location just to quickly realize that she is not as alone as she thought she was, as every move she makes is being observed by her very own stalker. Now, I have already made a full-on video review for this book, so I will not bother to go too much into detail here, but this book was incredibly poorly written. The female lead had no storyline or place in this book. The male lead was hypocritical beyond belief. The side storylines were unrealistic, and last but not least, the novel was beyond boring. In my mind, the only way I can justify this book's popularity is by acknowledging that the book is dealing with a lot of taboo topics, the biggest one being non-consensual relationship between the leads. But even that could not make this book interesting. Haunting Adeline, in my mind, has earned itself a place in the list of the absolute worst books I have ever read, where it can hang out with Den of Vipers and The Dice Man. Okay, now that we're done with the worst, let's proceed to the books that are absolutely worth checking out, yet due to the amount of amazing novels I've read, these, for one or the other reason, simply didn't make the cut. So here are my honorable mentions. The Ninth House by Jo Nesbø is a horror/psychological thriller published in 2023. If you have watched some of my previous videos, you might have gathered by now that I live in Norway, and Jo Nesbø is hands down one of the most popular and well-known Norwegian authors. And I'm a little bit ashamed to admit this out loud, but The Night House is the first Jo Nesbø book I have ever read, and it did not disappoint. So, The Night House is a story about a teenage boy who has just recently moved to a small town with his step-parents. Richard is what you would describe as bad news. He's a bully, a troublemaker. He doesn't care about other people, nor he cares about he's being perceived by others. Until one day he's forced to witness a horrific accident happen right in front of his eyes. He sees how a secluded telephone booth sucks Tom, his classmate, straight into the receiver, killing him in the process. Yes, that's an actual thing that happened in the book. But of course, nobody believes Richard. Instead, he becomes the prime suspect in Tom's disappearance. So the novel itself is divided into 3 parts, and while the first third reminded me of the goofy 90s horror, it was also the most boring and shallow part of the story. I could not find a common ground with the main 14-year-old character, as well as only very few horror scenes resonated with me. Basically, I couldn't care less about what will happen to any of the characters. And yet, when I started reading the second part of the book, I actually got intrigued, and by the third part of it, I had to accept the fact that Jo Nesbø fooled me so thoroughly with this novel that I would have not known at all what the story is about if I would not have finished every single page of it. And because of that, The Night House will be a novel I'll remember for a long while. Icebreaker and Wildfire by Hannah Grace, contemporary romance novels published in 2022 and 2023 respectively. Icebreaker gives us a story about an ice skater, Anastasia, and a hockey player, Nathan. When a series of misunderstandings happen and Anastasia's skating partner gets injured, Nathan, the problem-solving enthusiast, volunteers to adapt his hockey skills and skate with Anastasia instead. While in Wildfire, two college students, Russ and Aurora, have a wonderful one-night stand from which Aurora disappears before Russ even has a chance to ask her out. Due to the destiny gods, both Aurora and Russ end up spending the summer working together as camp counselors. Bad thing about that, however, is that the camp has a very strict no staff fraternizing rule, and Russ simply cannot afford to lose this job. These two are the type of novels I could recommend to literally anyone interested in a simple good time. Neither of them have overly complicated plots, yet they don't feel dumb or entirely unrealistic. The main couples have great chemistry, the dialogues are humorous, the side characters are explored well enough without overshadowing the main storylines, and the smut is on point. By now, I will read anything written by Hannah Grace because her books are exactly what one would expect from a rom-com type of a novel. The Roommate by Rosie Danan is a contemporary romance novel published in 2020 that I spent years avoiding simply because I hated book's cover. I know, so grown up of me. However, a few months back I gave in and bought this book mostly because I was one book short for free shipping. And I fully expected to read an absolute popcorn of a book, yet I ended up pleasantly surprised. So The Roommate is a story of a goody two-shoes young woman named Clara. Clara comes from a rich and influential family, and consequently she always tries her best to keep her image impeccable. Due to a series of events, however, Clara ends up temporarily sharing an apartment with Josh, an adult movie star, and a quite popular one at that. So this book that I expected to be nothing but fluff ended up being quite intriguing, as it actually took the time to explore the not often talked topics of pornography, the adult movie industry as a whole, sex work, the lack of protection that unfortunately still comes with the territory, and the prejudices others who are unaware of the industry's issues tend to have. Babel by R.F. Kuang is a fantasy/historical fiction novel that was published in 2022, and it's probably one of the most thought-provoking books I have read last year. So Babel takes us back to 1828 and tells us a story in which a Chinese orphan, Robin, gets adopted by a wealthy English gentleman and taken back to London, to the prestigious Royal Institute of Translation within the Oxford University, where young people are being taught to magically connect the knowledge of languages they have to the silver bars that are then being used to provide Britain with unparalleled power that consequently helps the empire to expand and keep the hold of already colonized territories. The more Robin learns about what actually happens at Babel, the better he understands that working for Babel also means working directly against his motherland. But does he actually have a choice in the matter? Now, I realize that Babel is not everyone's cup of tea, especially because this fantasy book has very little fantasy in it. R.F. Kuang did a wonderful job making this world in which magic exists feel so realistic that at times I would even forget that magic does exist in that world and that I'm not simply reading a history book. And while for me the events, the characters, and the political systems of the time were fascinating to read about, I can see how there are people who found this book to be dry and even boring at times. Overall, I liked it a lot and I would love to see more people giving it a try. I just think that potential readers should have a better understanding of what the novel is about. Babel is not really a fantasy novel, not in the traditional way at least. It's a historical fiction with magical realism elements. It's a story about the unfairness of colonization, about poverty, about being lost and needing to find your own identity and make the decisions in accordance with your own moral compass. But it is definitely not an easy read. Practice Makes Perfect by Sarah Adams is a contemporary romance novel published in 2023 and a second book in the When in Rome series. Practice Makes Perfect is a story of Annie, a sweet but socially anxious young woman whose dating life doesn't go the way she wants it to, specifically because she struggles with social interactions. And the sexy, charismatic bodyguard, Will, who has temporarily moved to the same town as Annie, and against his better judgment decides to help this kind woman out by allowing her to use him as her practice boyfriend. Practice Makes Perfect is a tender, witty, and emotional love story. It's funny and weirdly relatable, and most importantly, it portrays a mature relationship while still being wildly entertaining. Sarah Adams gave us a wonderful story with a strong couple that is healthy, understanding of one another, and capable of communication. In my eyes, this is the ultimate feel-good novel. And to finish this video on a high note and in a great mood, let's look at the best novels I have read last year. First and foremost, I have to admit that only in the year 2023 I found the wonder that is Elsie Silver. I noticed the first 3 books in her Chestnut Springs series flying off the shelves at work, and I got curious what all this hype is about. So, knowing that I have a long weekend ahead of me, I bought Flawless, the first book in the series, and I ate it up the same day. By the end of the weekend, I was done with Flawless, Heartless, and Powerless, and I had Reckless on a pre-order. All these books were such a good time. They were simple to read, they carried a certain level of familiarity by offering well-known tropes, yet at the same time they felt fresh enough to hook you in and keep you hooked. All the characters presented to us were interesting, their chemistry palpable, and their dialogues humorous. Chestnut Springs novels are simply wonderful, and I feel that any romance reader should give them a try. That being said, in October of last year, the 5th and the last book in the Chestnut Springs series, Hopeless, came out. And truth be told, if this novel had not been written by Elsie Silver, I probably would have not given it a try. According to the synopsis, in Hopeless, we were about to follow a love story of a war veteran with obvious PTSD issues and a little more than 10 years younger bartender who has grown up in an abusive family and consequently is looked down by the rest of the town simply because of the family she has been born into. These two very different people one day decide to make a deal and get fake engaged, hoping that by doing that he can assure his family that he's doing fine and she can improve her reputation in the eyes of the fellow townspeople. While I find the age gap trope quite interesting under the right circumstances, the shy virgin heroine is not something I usually find entertaining. And yet, since Elsie Silver has never disappointed me before, I bought Hopeless on the day of its release and I finished it basically in one sitting. And while I found the first Chestnut Springs books to be wonderful, I thought that Hopeless is somehow twice as good as its predecessors. Sure, I have to admit that the books included 1 or 2 scenes that were a little too cringy for my taste, but even these scenes could not force me to reduce this book's rating. I love Bailey and Bill. While reading Hopeless, I had no doubt in my mind that these two are soulmates. They're made for each other. They are meant to be. I read this novel with a huge smile on my face and butterflies in my stomach, and I'm sure you would too. The Hottest Dishes of Tartar Cuisine by Elena Bronsky was published in 2015, and somehow up until last year I have never even heard of it. Which is a shame because this novel was one of the best and most thought-provoking books I have read last year. The Hottest Dishes of Tartar Cuisine takes place over 18 years, beginning in the 1978 in the Soviet Union. In the novel, we follow a vile, egocentric, and narcissistic woman named Rosa, who suddenly learns that her stupid daughter, Sofia, had gotten pregnant by an unknown man. And due to all home remedies for an abortion failing, 9 months after Rosa becomes a grandmother to a little girl, she instantly starts to see as her own, as a second chance given by the god himself to have a better, smarter, and prettier daughter than Sofia. This novel encapsulates perfectly the difficulties of living with the toxic, manipulative parents who believe that their children are nothing more but the extension of them, born to do their bidding. Even better, since we get to follow the events of this story from the POV of the matriarch of the family, we get to be in the head of this person who does atrocious things while truly believing that she's doing them for the benefit of her children. It's a wonderful, very thought-through book that offers an inside view into a recent past, a messed-up family dynamic, and an interesting social commentary on how things were, how things change, and how people are forced to learn to adapt in order to keep their heads above the water. It's an anger-inducing story that I truly believe everyone should read. Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross is the first book in a fantasy duology known as Letters of Enchantment that was published in 2023, and it has to be one of the sweetest and most original fantasy novels I've read in recent years. In Divine Rivals, we follow Iris and Roman, two war correspondents who are united by the bond of magical letters and rivalry that arises from trying to prove to each other that they are a more talented writer. From this short synopsis, this novel might feel like nothing more but a simple romance novel with fantasy elements, but once I started reading it, I got instantly enchanted by the magical yet cruel world, by its deep lore, and by the characters whose life stories make your heart ache. It's a gorgeous story, and probably the thing that left the biggest impression on me is the feeling that this story could have happened to anyone. Most fantasy novels are about a chosen one, someone who is destined to change the world, or someone who is born with magical powers no one has ever seen before. But in Divine Rivals, we follow two simple writers, two simple soldiers, two young adults who simply dream of a different life. There could be thousands of others in the front lines whose stories are just as interesting as Iris and Roman's, but that just adds to the overall charm of the book. That forces you to think about the scale of the war, the innocent people thrust into it, and it makes you appreciate that you can be a part of someone's story. Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens, published in 2018, is one of those rare novels that I did not want to read, that I found difficult to get into, and that I ended up absolutely loving to a point where I can't stop recommending it to others. Where the Crawdads Sing is a story of a young woman who grew up isolated, abused by her family, and despised by fellow people simply because of the way she grew up. In addition to being a heartfelt novel of human nature, this story is also a wonderfully intertwined with one of the best murder mysteries I have ever read. This novel left a lifelong impression on me. That being said, I will not get much more into it, as I have already published a full video review on it, which you can check out by clicking on the link in the description below. That One Night by Emily Rath, published in 2023, is a romance novella and a prequel to the Jacksonville Ray book series. Now, last year, I have also had a pleasure to read Pucking Around and Pucking Wild, first and second book in the series respectively, and while Pucking Around should be complimented for a very interesting description of a polyamorous relationship, That One Night, in my opinion, stood out not only as the best book in the series, but as a great short read in general, for those who love smutty novels, that is. That One Night is literally just a story of our two leads meeting up and having a one-night stand. That's it. That's all you get. One night, in which Emily Henry did not only give us some wonderful spicy scenes, but also managed to make me fall in love with this dynamic, humorous, and genuine couple. If you are thinking about reading Pucking Around, then I would strongly recommend you to start with a prequel, as it will give you a much better insight into a couple of the main characters. But even if you do not think about reading Jackson Wild Ray, I think you should still give That One Night a try, as it still works as a standalone, and it's a quick read that stands out in the sea of contemporary romance novels. The Stolen Heir by Holly Black, published in 2023, is the first book in the Stolen Heir duology and the spin-off of the Cruel Prince trilogy. Now let me start this by saying that I'm a big fan of The Cruel Prince. I had never heard of Holly Black before giving Cruel Prince a try, and once I started reading it, I couldn't stop until I was done with the whole trilogy. That being said, the same year I also read all the books in the Grishaverse series, the Court of Thorns and Roses series, and Throne of Glass series, and somehow the Cruel Prince trilogy in my mind got lost among the other great fantasy books. That was until Stolen Heir came out and brought me back to Elfhame. Stolen Heir tells us a story of Oak, the Prince of Elfhame, and Suren, the only child of the Lady of the Court of Teeth, as well as the only person with the power to overthrow her mother and take the control of said court. These two individuals, despite sharing a friendly past, grew up estranged and fearful of one another, and now they need to work together in order to reach their individual goals. The only problem being that neither one of them can trust the other. I loved Stolen Heir. Truth be told, I might have even loved it more than Cruel Prince. It still had the same magical yet creepy vibe, unapologetic characters, unpredictable twists and turns, but at the same time it was packed with more action than the original trilogy was. That being said, if you haven't read any of Holly Black books, I would still recommend you to start with The Cruel Prince and make your way to The Stolen Heir just to get the fuller picture of this absolutely unique and beyond interesting world author created. And if you have read Cruel Prince and feel unsure on whether you should continue, then take this as your sign and do it. I loved Stolen Heir and I can't wait for the second book in the duology to be published. Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros is one of the biggest fantasy releases of 2023, as well as the first book in the Empyrean series. In Fourth Wing, we are being transferred to a fantasy world in which every person has a purpose. Our main lead, Violet, has known for years that she will be joining Scribe Quadrant, where she would live a safe and a quiet life. However, due to external circumstances, Violet is forced to pledge to join the Dragon Riders instead, the most elite group of soldiers. The only problem being that there are not nearly enough dragons for the amount of candidates wishing to become riders. And dragons only bond with the strongest of the humans, making the stakes high. Either bond a dragon or die. Now, I can't speak for everyone, but to me this novel felt like it was written specifically for millennials like me who lived through the rapid growth of fantasy novels curated towards young adults. Fourth Wing just gave me all kinds of nostalgic feelings and I ate it up. The dystopian world structure reminded me of the Hunger Games, and the division of people into separate quadrants depending on their character followed the well-established blueprint of Harry Potter, and the trials that the potential dragon riders had to endure just screamed Divergent. For me, Fourth Wing ended up being an incredibly pleasurable read which gave me a perfectly established world system, fast pacing, high stakes, magic, dragons, kick-ass protagonist, dragons, close-knitted group of friends, dragons, slow burn enemies to lovers romantic subplot, and did I mention dragons? Fourth Wing is a type of fantasy novel that I can easily recommend to fantasy lovers, to romance lovers, and to anyone in between who simply wants to check out an entertaining story that is hard to put down. Happy Place is a contemporary romance novel by Emily Henry that was published in 2023. As of now, I have read every book written by Emily Henry, and just seeing her name on the cover is the reason enough for me to get a book without as much as checking what said book is about. Emily Henry is the queen of contemporary romance, someone whom I always recommend, and to those who never read romance but are curious about the genre, and for romance enthusiasts. Her novels are funny, entertaining, and relatable, and Happy Place is not an exception. Happy Place tells us a story via two timelines. In one timeline, we get the story of how Harriet and Wynne met and how their relationship progressed to the point of the breakup, while in the other timeline, we get the present story of them reuniting for a vacation with friends, a sacred tradition they have been doing for years. In order to keep everyone happy and this time together as uncomplicated as possible, Harriet and Wynne decide to simply not tell their friends about their breakup and pretend to be a couple for the duration of vacation, before going their own individual ways again. In this novel, Emily Henry explores the topics of friendship, love, and the pain of growing up and growing apart. She does a wonderful job combining this light-hearted romance with the more complicated topics of mental illness and feeling stuck in a place, in a life that doesn't make you happy anymore. Happy Place is hands down the best romance novel I have read last year, and I seriously cannot recommend it enough. 1,000 Boy Kisses by Tilly Cole is a young adult contemporary romance novel that was published in 2016, and I'm ashamed to say that I have not heard anything about it before 2023. 1,000 Boy Kisses is a story about Poppy and Runa. Runa and his family moved to the USA when Runa was still just a child. They moved in a house next door to Poppy, and their friendship started to blossom, eventually turning into a sweet and fragile first love. As the time went by, however, Rune was forced to separate from Poppy and move back to his native country, Norway. While the separation was supposed to be a temporary inconvenience, 2 years apart changed both Rune and Poppy to a point where neither one of them can see a way back to what they were before. While the premise of the book sounds pretty shallow, the novel is anything but. I don't want to go into it here because I try to avoid spoiling anything at all when it comes to this book, but trust me, you will have your heart broken. I ugly cried through half of this book. A Thousand Boy Kisses is emotional, it's bittersweet and memorable. It carved its way into my heart, and I have a feeling that it will stay with me for a long while. My Sister's Keeper by Jodi Picoult is a contemporary fiction novel that was first published in 2004, and I believe that to most people is mostly known due to its 2009 movie adaptation by the same name. If you are one of those people who have watched and enjoyed the movie, then go read the novel. Trust me, it's 100 times better. And if you have not heard of this book before, then let me tell you that My Sister's Keeper is a story of a young girl and her family. This young girl in question, Anna, has loving parents, an older brother, and a sister, Kate, who has been fighting leukemia all of her life. Anna's life is rather unconventional. Even though she is completely healthy by the age of 13, she has already undergone countless surgeries, transfusions and shots, all in order to help her sister feel better. However, the more Anna helps her sister, the more the quality of her own life seems to decline. Until one day, Anna decides to find a lawyer to represent her wish to have the autonomy of her own body. My Sister's Keeper is a novel packed with emotion. It's a book that will force you out of your comfort zone, that will make you look at the world from a different perspective, that will make you ask yourself, what would I do in their place? My Sister's Keeper does not give you any answers, but its multiple POVs shows that there are no villains in the story, only people who are doing what they believe is best. It's a very original, very interesting and thought-provoking book that should be on everyone's radar. And last but not least, we have The Bridge Kingdom duology by Daniel L. Jensen. This fantasy duology consists of The Bridge Kingdom and The Traitor Queen and was published in 2018 and 2020 respectively. The Bridge Kingdom tells us a story of, well, Bridge Kingdom and its king Eren. The Bridge Kingdom is a secluded yet vital part of this fantasy world that operates as the main trading center and therefore has an immense control over the other kingdoms. This kingdom is also believed to abuse its power by enriching itself at the cost of the well-being of those who disagree with their methods. Lara, a warrior princess and assassin, is the only one who is able to put the stop to this injustice by marrying the King Eren, infiltrating into their secret operations, and dismantling the system from the inside. However, as it happens often with fantasy novels, nothing is really quite as it seems, and King Eren might just be much more of a hero than a villain. I loved the Bridge Kingdom duology. It was very fast-paced, it had interesting characters, a very well-made world system, romance, never-ending clever thought-through quests, betrayal, and truly badass female lead. Basically, this duology had everything I'm looking for in a romance adventure novel. I got so invested in the story and so intrigued by the cliffhanger that I couldn't put it down until I finished the very last page. So here it is, guys, the good, the bad, and the awesome. I do hope that by sharing my favorites of 2023, I inspired you to add a few more books to your already overflowing TBRs. Thanks for checking this video out, and happy reading!